Welcome everybody. I hope everybody is safe and healthy and happy. Numbers seem to be going in the wrong direction for us here in North Carolina, so I hope everybody takes all the precautions they need over a holiday weekend coming up. This talk really is being pulled from, in some part, mostly, I guess, from a talk I gave at the American Public Gardens Association several years ago, talking about wild collections and why we're doing it. So this is not going to be a plant exploration talk with a lot of pictures of, us in the woods and things like that. It's really going to be more about, why we do what we do, what makes it important, what the need is for it. So I'm going to jump in. Chris will be on the chat. You can ask questions via chat, and Chris can answer some of those. You can also, at the end, you can unmute yourself and ask a question, or ask a question on the chat then. So I'm just going to take you through this a little bit. This talk really came from a joint program with a couple other people. And so I included some of the images from one of my co-panelists, Chris Bachtel, who's in charge of all the horticulture at the Morton Arboretum in Indiana, outside Chicago. So some of these slides are not from me. Some of them are focus on Indiana. So if that's why there's some things about a different state than North Carolina. Let's see. So, we live in a changing world. We know that it's changing in a lot of ways. Climate change is happening. It's not something in the future. It's something that's going on right now. I'm going to show you some slides that illustrate what's happening, but we're already seeing that the weather patterns are getting more disrupted, that summer droughts are getting worse, that heavy rain events are getting more frequent, that's even more of a problem in a lot of ways than temperature changes. But we're getting warmer. This is from Blue Hill Observatory, and you can see that if we go back from the 1840s to today, you can see that we are going up. It's some years we're colder, some years we're hotter, but the overall trend is warmer and warmer. Now, I know there are people who don't believe that global warming is human-induced. I'll say this: if you pay attention to scientists, they will tell you quite emphatically humans are causing a lot of that. Now, we've always had climate that changes. That's why we've had ice ages and things like that. So, in some ways, some of this is natural. We're just speeding up the process and making it worse. So there's a lot we can do to help that. I'm not really going to talk about that right now. But no matter what, the fact is that climate is changing. You see the hardiness zone map, the 1990 map, right here where we are. We're pretty solid yellow all the way through most of North Carolina, which is zone 7. Now half the state, more than half the state, is really zone 8. That's basically, we are now zone 8. If you look at South Carolina and Georgia, zone 8, almost entirely again. So you know, that changes what we can grow, but it also, you know, it not only changes what we can grow in our gardens, but it's going to change what grows in our woodlands and what grows in our natural areas. So, and you can see here's two different models for climate predictions for, again, for Indiana. And really the difference is not so much temperature wise. They both are very similar in terms of what they think the temperature will be. The difference is really these two models have some different predictions about what moisture is going to be like, what precipitation is going to be like. So in the Canadian model, it's a little bit drier than the Hadley model, which is a little bit more precipitation. So, you know, that's changing, but, and you can see, you know, just photographic proof. If you've looked at old photos, you know, from here, from somewhere else, old childhood homes, and you go back and look at the same day, you know, May 1st here in Massachusetts, the deciduous trees are deciduous May 1st. That's, you're still coming out of winter. Nowadays, pretty typical by early May, things have leafed out. Now, that doesn't mean they don't get zapped back and get hit by a frost, but they have really leafed out. So there are changes. So let's look a little closer to home. Raleigh here. We're looking at, you know, right now, or we were 20 years ago. I still think of us as being closer to 2000 than 2030. But, you know, 15 days of the heat index above 105, you know, it's going up. And it's not just the heat, and for us, it's also it's getting muggier. It's getting more humid. The dew point is changing as this is changing. I will get to plants, I promise. I just thought, since we're in the middle of COVID, I'd talk about climate change to make everybody feel better about this. You know, this is the Raleigh-Durham area. Average temperature is growing pretty significantly. So something we have to go, you know, days above 95 degrees. I remember a place I used to work just 25 years ago at a retail nursery. We used to have, in August, we would have a discount for every day above 90 that it got. Now, we were up in the mountains, it was a little cooler, but, you know, it's 10% if we had one day above 90, 20% if we had 2 days. And most years I worked there, we had no days above 90. I looked on some historic data, and, you know, now we'd be giving away the farm because they're having multiple days above 90 in every August. So what does that mean for us? That means that we are getting closer to the climate of southern Texas by 2100, and most of us will be gone by 2100, but we're going to be along for the ride as we get there. Now, interestingly, our precipitation so far has stayed pretty steady, and you can see there are peaks when we have a lot of rain and valleys when we don't have much. You remember 2007, that 100-year drought? You see that's right here. The key with this is summer precipitation. So, you know, that goes up, that goes down. But even though we're staying pretty steady, it's changing how it's coming. We're getting more droughts during summer. This has to do with not the number of droughts, but the severity. And there's a whole formula for how they come at this whole number of severity. But we're getting worse summer droughts. They're lasting longer, and they're more intense. And then the rainfall events are getting worse and worse. So we're looking at seeing, from 2000, seeing a 50% increase in severity of summer droughts. But we're getting more heavy downpours. This is across all of North Carolina. So while it might look, if you look at monthly averages, it might stay pretty steady all the way across as our historic. But if you have 29 days of drought and then one day that drops 4 or 5 inches of rain from a monthly total or a yearly average, it looks like nothing's changed, but it really has. And all these things are affecting the plants that we grow. This is the worst one for me. I just put this in here. This is on this great site, Climate Central, where you can look at any state and get some of these things. There's a lot more information there, but the mosquito season growing, that is the worst for here in Raleigh. Oh, hate the mosquitoes. So climate's changing, but also the world is becoming smaller. And new species are going to be introduced, whether that's new species of, viruses or plants or animals, good, bad, neutral. We are mixing things up. We are moving people, we're moving products around. They're going all over the place. It's in ballast water in ships that we've gotten the zebra clams that are becoming a real problem. It's when we introduce plants, especially nowadays, we're being very deliberate in what we're bringing in and how we're bringing it in, and being very, very careful. But, there's packing material in these cargo containers. There's things that cling to the hulls. There's a lot of movement that are accidental. And that's how some of our worst problems have come through accidental introduction. So I love this. This is the USDA, who are charged with protecting us from pests and invasives and really being on the front edge of keeping our agriculture and horticulture safe. And as Alan Stoner from there says, conditions and needs continue to change, and collecting genetic diversity is how we have the resources to deal with them. There are some people who think we should not move plants around, but without having the genetic diversity, we're really will be in poor shape. And I think in a couple of weeks, I may be talking about, if you look at my schedule, I'm going to be talking about the invasive conundrum in a couple of weeks. So that'll be kind of the other piece of this. So when we're looking at plant exploration, we're looking to really broaden the genetic pool of what we have there. We want to have things that are more adaptable. They might be more cold hardy. They might be more heat resistant, as climate is changing, more drought tolerant. If you look at our native Magnolia virginiana, the Sweet Bay magnolia, it grows from Canada all the way down into Florida. And across, if you were to look at one from Canada and one from Florida, you would say these are not the same species. They're tall and deciduous. The farther north you go, they get shorter and more evergreen the further south you go. But if you look at them as a whole continuum, you can tell they're the same species. Well, often with plants, both exotic plants that we go collect, but also native plants that we collect, often what we have in cultivation is just from one or two collections or populations and doesn't really represent everything that's out there. So we can really change what we're growing by collecting different genetics, but it also increases their insect and disease resistance. We're also going out there to conserve rare species and select improved forms. And also, it's always about collaborating with institutions and colleagues, both in the States and internationally. It really expands what we learn and what we can pass on to other people. And you can see this is a great old CIA map of China, including Mongolia there, and back in the early 70s, where, you know, they kind of map onto the whole country what the analogs are in the US. The climate has changed since that time, so this isn't exactly correct anymore, but it's kind of interesting. We don't need to look at that. So why do we go to China so much? China's the one we talk about. China's often called the mother of gardens. It's a massive area, but it is one of the richest areas, especially for a place that only has a relatively small portion of it that's truly tropical. And most of that's along the coasts where it's been under cultivation for centuries. So it's just incredibly rich. When you look at some of these, you know, important horticultural plants, you know, like magnolias, a third of the world's species are in China, and a fifth of all of them are found only in China. You know, half of the peonies are from China, and a third are only found in China. And you can just go down this list like this, and just about anything, any plant that we grow, there's probably more of them in China. There are very few exceptions. So it's very rich in plants that are important for us. So here are a couple of recent examples of plant exploration and introduction. So emerald ash borer, this is, you know, becoming just a massive problem. It has been less of a problem for us in the South because we don't grow quite so many ashes. We have them in the woods, but we don't grow them as landscape trees like they did up here in the North, where it was one of the primary shade trees that people would grow. They grow fast, they're pretty, they were relatively disease resistant. But emerald ash borer came through, and you can see kind of what it looks like, why it's called emerald ash borer. Much prettier as an adult than as a larva. Those larvae dig through under the bark in the cambium layer of a tree and kill it. This is what they do, and you can go through whole neighborhoods and just see dead street trees like this. And if you peel back the bark, you see where the larvae have just eaten through. People mostly don't understand that in a tree, you really have in the trunk of a tree, there's very little of it that's living tissue. There's a thin layer called the cambium layer right under the bark. Everything inside the cambium layer is basically wood that's dead, you know, much inside of that. And on the outside, you have the bark. And so they go through and they eat this layer. And it's the same reason why you can cut a thin strip of bark all the way around a tree, and that will kill it. You've killed the living part in there, and all the nutrients can't, and water can't go up and down on there. So it's, you know, that's a huge problem, and it's costing, you know, it's not just killing off ash trees. It costs a tremendous amount of money. If you have hundreds of street trees in your community that are dead, it costs the city a tremendous amount of money to cut those trees down. You know, look at this. This is a winter shot, so you can't see if there are more dead, but this is what happened. These are dead trees, one after another. These were all ashes. And so you've cut it down. Now you've got utilities under there, so it's difficult to get rid of those stumps. It's a real problem. So northern China has some great ashes for the northern part of the U.S. You've got the Fraxinus manchurica, which is a really nice shade tree and is emerald ash borer resistant. Again, these are Chris Bachtel's images. So I can't even remember what island ash is, what species that is. Chinese flowering ash, probably Fraxinus sieboldii, which is a really beautiful flowering tree. We grow it here. It is quite nice. So another example, a couple other ones, woolly adelgids. That's one that certainly affected us. Has affected us a little bit less, the EFB, Eastern Filbert blight. But woolly adelgids all through the U.S. This is 10 years old, so it's expanded beyond that. You see the little bugs on the underside of the leaf, little cottony things on your hemlocks, and it really damages, ultimately kills hemlocks. And I've walked through forests in the mountains of Virginia that looked like this, that it looked like devastation of these dead hemlocks. But the Chinese hemlocks, there are a couple different ones that are being used, have excellent resistance. This is Tsuga chinensis, but there are other ones that work as well. So, sometimes we go and we collect specifically for something like that, because while we have Tsuga chinensis in this country, we don't necessarily have a lot of genetic diversity, and that's what is going to be key for helping breed for woolly adelgid resistance. So you collect those cones and you get them to folks like Susan Bentz at the USDA, who hybridizes them. And these are all hybrids, so you can see a lot of differences in habit. And so start selecting, really good forms to introduce. Or Filbert blight. Filberts are a huge crop in the north, in the Pacific Northwest. Not such a big one here, but we do have Filbert blight here as well. And so the main problem is on Corylus calerna, the Turkish filbert, which is a gorgeous tree, really tough, easy tree. And you get this Eastern Filbert blight right there. You see what this tree starts looking like. You start to have branches that are dying on there. Doesn't take down the whole tree at once. But there are resistant ones like Corylus fargesii. And you can see there's the fruit on it. It's got gorgeous bark. It's called the paper bark filbert. If any of y'all had joined us during Kim Shearer, Friends of the Arboretum lecture, online lecture last month, she talked about hybridizing some of the Corylus with fargesii for ornamental purposes. She was talking about purple leaf cultivars of Corylus maxima breeding with fargesii to get this great bark with the burgundy leaves and gold leaves of some of the other cultivars. So let's move on more into kind of where I was talking about. And I've adjusted this a bit because my part of the talk was, how can it benefit your garden, financially to go out and collect. So some of this kind of relates to that when this original talk, but I've tweaked it for this. So, there are people who have concerns about collecting plants from the wild, and they should, because there's been a lot of bad practices. There's been a lot of bad players in this over the years, and there still is. Here in the US, I ordered from a nursery, the only nursery I could find, a bunch of native plants that I wanted for a garden somewhere else, and I'm talking about a lot. And when we got the plants, everything had been wild collected, and it was hundreds and hundreds of plants, and it made me sick. I had no idea that was being done. I reported the nursery, but And that happened a lot in the past with Western collectors in Asia and in the tropics and temperate areas. So I always say you really want to talk to your constituents, your supporters, your members, if you're a garden, about why you're collecting. What is your purpose? And you should have a purpose for collecting. It shouldn't just be to go out and get a bunch of stuff. And then, then we have to make sure that it's being done safely and ethically and legally. So why are we collecting? And this kind of repeats something that was in Chris's portion of the talk. We want to bring plants in that are not in cultivation. That may be new species. And often we don't know it's a new species until we've grown it for a while and can see the flower. But also, as Chris previously mentioned, bring in new genetics that are not here. A lot of these widespread plants. The one that I always mention is Chinese fringe tree, which is one of the best urban tolerant small to medium trees that we can grow. Our native fringe tree is wonderful, but it's not quite as the Chinese fringe tree. And the Chinese fringe tree grows from Mongolia just about all the way down to Taiwan. So that would be something that's growing from Nova Scotia down to Miami in terms of so almost everything we have mostly a northern form in cultivation that is from a population near Beijing. And then the southern form that's in cultivation in the US is almost entirely from Taiwan. But it ranges all through there. And when you look at herbarium specimens, they show little tiny leaf ones and ones that are described as being small shrubs, but they're in flower. I mean, there's just this whole range of plants, of selections represented in herbaria sheets, but they're not represented in collections. Ted Stevens, the owner of Nurseries Caroliniana, good friend of the Arboretum, says that when he taught for a semester in North Korea, and the dean of the school where he taught, who has an agriculture background, told him that there is a pink Chinese fringe tree in northern Vietnam. He was not able to get it, but we still have hope that one of these days we'll be able to. So that may be a new species, or it just may be a genetic variation of the Chinese fringe tree, Chionanthus retusus, but there's so much more there. So we want to bring things that are not in cultivation. When I went to Taiwan, one of the plants that I really wanted to bring back was Fatsia polycarpa, because it's not in cultivation. I'd like to do another trip to Taiwan and try and find some Fatsia at slightly higher elevations, because what we brought back is still a little bit tender. It is, really an 8B plant. It's not quite, it gets hit by cold here for us pretty often. We've had some that have been killed outright, but we've got some that are shown to be pretty hardy. And I think this is a plant that has a great potential for North Carolina nurserymen, because it grows much faster than the Japanese Fatsia, which means from a cutting to a saleable plant, you're talking about it's being done in a third of the time that Fatsia japonica. Next thing I want to do is breed this with Fatsia japonica, so that we can see if we can get the quicker growth of polycarpa, but get the hardiness of japonica. And if we can do that, and then start to bring in some of the real ornamental characteristics of some of the Fatsias, like variegation and things like that, I think there's just tremendous opportunity for developing some really great plants for North Carolina and industry and beyond. There are different forms there. This is a much more cut leaf form than the other ones. And there are other related plants like the dendropanax, which I think could make some nice evergreen small trees for us in the Southeast. Scheffleras, we've tried these and we're not finding them to be heat tolerant as we'd like them to be. So we need to go, and instead of trying to collect the highest elevation ones, we need to try and collect the lowest elevation forms of Schefflera taiwaniana that we can. And still one we're working on getting in cultivation, Cynopanix formosanus. It will be probably next year starting to take some cuttings and getting this bulked up, but another beautiful little evergreen plant in that same Fatsia family. So maybe we can cross this with Fatsia polycarpa and get a hardier plant that's got some blue to the foliage. So these things that are not in cultivation, but we also want to bring in superior or different genetics, like I mentioned. So we get the cold hardiness, the flower color, better foliage, size, whatever we're looking for. Got to have variation, genetic variation, in order to improve plants. You know, so we go out and we find, you know, things like this, a darker leaved saxifrage than what's currently in the industry, or acerums that have the same species that really was not much in cultivation, and then we find all these different forms, and you know, starting to get some of these introduced. This is not one that we introduced from the wild, although this is plant on the full tree on the left. Actually, both of these are in the wild. But we have a great plant here at the Arboretum that we've just recently named White Jade of this Chinese dogwood. And so when we went back to China, that was one of the things that we looked for, was this species, so we could grow out more seed and see what kind of variation we have. And we're still growing some of these out, and we're still watching them. The form that we've been growing for a long time has the best bark of them all. So that's why we named that one, but we're still looking at other characteristics like fall color and things like that to perhaps introduce. An interesting one to me, Titanotrichum oldhamii. This is a great little shade perennial. We love it. It is, every plant in cultivation looks exactly like this. We were really hoping to find some more variation when we went collecting it. It only grows in Taiwan. Unfortunately, every plant we found in Taiwan looked exactly like what we have in cultivation here. So, you know, there was obviously some genetic bottleneck at some point in its evolution, and it never really moved beyond that. So, you know, that's a plant that we're probably, unless we were to find something out there or there was some really strange mutation, we're not going to get something different. I had my dreams of solid yellow flowered one, and one that had a lot more red throughout it that would potentially lead to, you know, a really nice red form of it. But I don't know that that's going to happen. You know, or something where the new growth on a rhododendron that comes out bright red. So imagine you get that bright red you get flowers, and then you get that bright red new growth. It would be like an extended season of flowering. And even, you know, back in 1986, when J.C. Ralston went to Korea collecting, the prime reason for that collecting trip was to collect more cold hardy Camellia japonica. Those were the most northern coldest climate populations of Camellia japonica were in Korea, where they were collecting. And so those led to some of the more cold hardy camellias that we have now. They were bred specifically with this Korean material. There are other reasons. Conservation of rare plants is, a friend of the Arboretum has said that if climate is changing, the worst thing you can do to save rare plants is to leave them where they are. Not to mention the fact that we keep building roads and buildings and expanding into areas where these plants are. And that's not just this country, that's every country. So conservation is important, and we need to propagate these plants and grow them in other places, because we can't just leave them where they are. And then just more general research purposes, we grow them. So one that's a great one, Acer pentaphyllum, is a plant that's not really hardy for us, but colleagues of mine at other botanic gardens went and collected this species in every spot they could throughout China, because it grows in these rocky stream sides, and a lot of those areas are either being dammed up, so they're flooded, or the rivers are receding, and so it's drying out, and there's real concern that this is a plant that could go extinct in China. So they went and collected from every population they could, brought them back, they shared the seeds, shared the plants along with the location data with gardens all across the country. Now, if it was the J.C. Ralston Arboretum who had been part of that, we would have been sharing very widely with nurserymen as well, because we believe that better than just having botanic gardens having a plant, if we have lots of people having the plant, then we have an even better shot at saving it. One that I'd like to go back to China to collect, Carpinus putoensis. So Putoshan, an island off the coast of Shanghai, kind of south of Shanghai. At one point, they thought that it was down to one single individual. Now there are more of them on the island. I thought in 2008, but there was no seed when I was there, so I could not collect it. But I'd love to get that and get that into cultivation. As far as I know, it's not in cultivation anywhere in the West. But we also take these plants and we study them. This is perhaps small for everybody to see, but there is a plant, Reineckia. It's a little kind of think of a, if you don't know it, Ophiopogon liriope type plant. It's a really nice ground cover for shade. And people collect it, and they look so different, but when Aaron Floden, who's a great botanist, does the DNA work, he keeps coming back to and saying it's all the same species. So a group of us who are interested in this plant started sharing a document. And man, Google Documents are great because you can have different people kind of adding to it. So we have, juniper level botanic garden. Cannot remember what LWG stands for. Aaron Floden, the botanist. We have Krug Farms in Wales, Far Reaches Farm in Oregon, us at JCRA, Nurseries Caroliniana in South Carolina, Heronswood, who did not add their information in yet, and the National Arboretum. And so we just started listing all the plants that we knew of, all the plants that we had, with collection numbers if we knew it, where we had gotten them. Whoops. And this is only one piece of it. This document goes on and on. And so we've started, describing it, putting in it when we see them flower. You see a lot of these are late. We've got some, I need to add some information because we've got some that are starting to flower early. What's interesting is most of them the flowers are pink opening to white. We've got one we collected on Imyashan that's a pure white one that really, the flower really pops compared to some other ones. We've also collected one that is almost 18 inches tall, whereas there's one that we grow from Far Reaches Farm, Jinfo Jewel, that only grows about maybe 3 inches tall. So, and this is just one group we're doing this with. We do it with other groups of plants as well, with other partners. But, you know, now we've taken what the National Arboretum does and we've expanded that across nurseries and gardens and researchers. And so we've been doing this with more and more plants, with polygonatums and other interesting plants. So this is what's needed for research. It's hard to grow everything, but it's also hard to be able to tell what Jinfo Jewel is going to do, you know, in Oregon or Washington State versus North Carolina or South Carolina. So we're getting to see more of how it works by spreading it around. So the question always comes to invasive plants and other pests. And I am going to talk about invasives, like I said, in 2 weeks. But I will mention just a little bit here. When we're importing plants, all the seed has to be clean. There can be no flesh on the seed at all, period. So this is what we pack. Strainers and bags and all kinds of things to clean the seed. Spread it across the bed, around the room, because we have to get that seed completely clean. Plants have to be soil free. Cannot be a bit of soil on those plants. And these plants would not be ready to go. You would need to get rid of any of the foliage that was dead, any foliage that had any kind of spots or looks like it could be diseased or anything. Got to get them inspected in the country of origin. You got to know what you can bring in. And there are, I don't know how many lists now that are different, you know. So, you know, say fur. You can't bring in fur except for from Canada because there are all these rusts on there. Now, so this fur, it only includes seed if they're specifically mentioned. So they're not specifically mentioned, so you can bring in firs. Or maples, except for palmatum and japonicum, meeting special conditions. You can bring in seed, but not plants. You can't bring them in from these places unless there's some specific importation things. And so you can bring them in from Europe if the nursery is doing some special things, or Japan if the nursery is doing some special things. So you have to know that, but that's not the only list. There are these not approved pending pest risk analysis plants, you know, and you have to know not only what the host plant is, you know, what the plant is, but what country and what parts you can and cannot bring in. And they're just, the lists seem to be endless and they grow all the time. It's harder and harder to bring plants in. And you got to make sure you jump through all those hoops. You got to do the inspections. You got to get it through, have it inspected in the country and then inspected by the Animal Plant Health Inspection Services, USDA, when it enters this country. You got to make sure you do all the parts right. So let me go back to that. So we think that the plant collecting is worth jumping through these hoops. We think it's worth the efforts that go into it from us and from other people, because it is how we expand our plant palette. It is how we are going to have to, what we're going to have to do to find plants that are going to survive and live as conditions change. We can't, you know, our native plants are not necessarily terribly well adapted to the changes that were happening, especially the rapidity of the changes during times when, you know, ice ages and, you know, glaciers moving. That was all a slow process, and plants kind of moved or died out and then moved back as glaciers and temperatures rose. And so we need to keep collecting plants to develop that resilience in our plants. You know, we would not be having these great elms that are out there now after Dutch elm disease if we did not breed with Asian species to breed in the resistance. Same thing with the Filberts. And it's not just, it's not just Filbert nuts, but just last week here with some folks who are growing truffles, and the two main trees for growing truffles are oaks and filberts. And so looking for Filbert blight resistant filberts is important for continued production of truffles. So if you like your truffle fries, you want to do that. And it's all about the long-term gain. When a serious problem arises, it can be too late to just start taking steps then. If we can already be in the process, be aware of what could be a problem and work towards it, it'll really help us out. And that's what we do. So I do want to mention before I start taking questions that one exciting development here at the Arboretum, our plant sale cart, which people love, they come to visit that. We are going to be putting it outside of our gates Tuesdays and Thursdays from 8 to 4. You can come shop it. It is just like it was previously when it was inside the gate. It is cash or check only. There won't be anybody out there to give you change. So if you bring a 20 and the plant is $10, you can get 2 of them, or you can make it a donation. A couple of the plants that are going to be out tomorrow include moonlight false hydrangea vine, schizophragma moonlight. We've got Disporopsis pernii, is great evergreen perennial for woodlands. It spreads a nice dense ground cover over time, slowly if you just have one plant, but beautiful in flower. Deer do not eat mine. I make no guarantees about yours. We've got the perennial heliotrope in there. Our green fruited figs, love these green fruited figs. The birds don't realize they're ripe, so they don't tend to pick at them because they're not turning purple. So you just have to go out and squeeze them to make sure they're ripe. You want to let them get real ripe on the tree, and you can do that because the birds don't eat them. Millettia pulchra, which is a plant that it is impossible to have a picture do it justice. It's got these purple pea flowers. It kind of makes a little bit of a suckering shrub, but gorgeous, gorgeous foliage. You can see it looks like each leaf is kind of outlined in silver. Love that plant. And then I think we've also got Canna orange tiger out there. Beautiful flowered form with the variegated leaves. And maybe some other things. I'm not sure if this is all, but I know these all will be on the cart. So they will be out there Thursday, 8 to 4. Friday, they won't be out there. Monday, they won't be out there. Tuesday, they'll be out there. You can go on our website and there is a link to if you go to horticulture and sales, you can see trailer sales. You can see what's out there currently when you look at that. So happy to take questions, happy to expand on anything. You all let me know what would you like. Chris, were there any questions?
The chat was nice and quiet.
All right. Well, this wasn't so plant focused. My one next week is plant focused. I think I'm talking about underused hollies next week, right? Put Chris on the spot. I shouldn't do that. He doesn't know when
Yes, that's correct.
Any questions? Feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question out loud.
I like those charts that you had shared. I hadn't seen some of them before.
Yeah, they're a little bit out of date, as you can tell, because they're really based on kind of 2000 data, not 2020 for the most part. but it's a neat site, and you can look at any state. Now I can't remember what the name of it was. What the name of the site was. Give me a second, I can tell you. It was Climate Central online. But yeah, it's interesting.
Hey, Mark.
Yes.
Did you ever get the tour of your home up?
Did I get that to you, Chris? Now I can't even remember.
I wasn't alerted to it.
You promised last week you would.
I know, and I didn't get it up on Friday, like I said, but I think I got it up. I think I got it to Chris, but didn't send him an email about it.
Uh-huh.
So,
Chris, when you get it, will you send the link to us?
Well, it'll be posted in YouTube, and if you're a subscriber, YouTube lets you know that a new video is available.
Okay, good.
Every one of our cuttings has a list of all the Midweek with Mark videos in it.
Got it.
Right there too.
Okay. Well, everybody have a good week.
You too. And good on you for exercising while you're doing this.
I'm on the treadmill going at it.
I see that.
Yep. Y'all have a good week, and everybody stay healthy.
You too. Happy 4th of July. Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you all. Stay safe. Have a happy 4th of July. And
you too.
You next week to talk about some funky hollies.
Stay healthy.
For the presentation, Mark. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
Thank you. Wonderful as usual.